Hello, Year 12. As I mentioned on the announcement yesterday, hopefully you saw it on the Canvas page, I've noticed that lots of people writing Mod A drafts need the same feedback. And it's basically you need to write more. You need to ensure that you've got a balanced approach to the two texts, and there needs to be greater depth of analysis. Now, it's all well and good for me to say that. It is sometimes tricky to know exactly what that looks like. The very best way for me to show you is to show you a 20 out of 20 response that Nessa published that does all of those things in a really clear way. So what I'm going to do is read through the essay with you. Now, this is one that I'm relatively sure I gave a copy of to my class in the lead up to the assessment task, but we didn't get a chance to go through it in a huge amount of depth. So this will be hopefully a bit more informative. This essay is one that you can actually copy the style of if you wish. I think the structure for this one is quite simple and it works really nicely. And if you are feeling a bit overwhelmed by the Mod A essay, this is a structure that I do actually recommend. I talk about the way that in writing a Mod B essay, two very strong body paragraphs can work extremely well. Now, that obviously is true for Mod A as well. However, this particular essay has got 4 body paragraphs. They go a paragraph on Woolf, a paragraph on Daldry, paragraph on Woolf, paragraph on Daldry. And so it just becomes a more a simpler way to look at the two texts that works well enough to get a 20 out of 20, and it might be an approach that you want to have a look at. So the question for this one, this was the 2020 HSC question, and the question is this, which should look a bit familiar to you. In textual conversations, the later text is often seen as a shadow, lacking the originality and power of the earlier. To what extent is this statement true of the two prescribed texts you have studied in Module A? So, you're all familiar with that question. It's one that we looked at for the assessment task. So hopefully, whatever it is that you're preparing in terms of analysis actually suits this response quite well. Now, what I wanted to point out to begin with is the marking feedback, because this is what we're going to be looking at. The marking feedback is where the markers are saying, well, this is what we're seeing in the responses that are getting those higher marks. So your responses that are, high B into the A range, and this is where we're seeing, or they were seeing a lot of the responses falling into the C range and below. Obviously, we've been talking a bit about this idea of to what extent, and that you address the to what extent in an articulate manner. That obviously that's only relevant for a question that asks to what extent. You need to demonstrate a detailed understanding of context, differentiating between social, historical and cultural contexts and how these affect each text. Now, it's done in a very integrated way in this response, and it isn't necessary for you to explain the context. The markers know the context. What is necessary is for you to refer to it in your analysis, and I'll be pointing that out as we go along. Discuss both texts in an evaluative and analytical way rather than a descriptive way, and you hear us saying that all the time. Don't retell what it's about. You need to evaluate and analyse. And this is where students tended to fall down, I guess. Articulating to what extent the statement is true, so not being able to really address that to what extent aspect of the question was a problem. Now, avoid relying on the discussion of themes. I often say get the word themes out of your vocabulary, because as soon as you start writing in your essay the theme of, it pulls away from a conceptual discussion and becomes a thematic discussion. Now, even though those concepts are themes, it's something that can limit the way that you express yourself if you start talking about the theme of, okay? And the other area that they saw students not doing so well on was not being able to demonstrate a holistic understanding of the module description and textual conversation. So not referring to the notion of the all those things that we see in the rubric for textual conversations. So these are the things I'm going to be pointing out in this essay. So here is the essay. Now, as we go, I'm going to be telling you how long each of these different sections are, so that you get a bit of an idea. Now, it's hard to say your essay needs to be X amount of pages, obviously, because everyone's handwriting is a bit different. I've counted up the words in this essay and in the different sections. I may have made, a bit of an error, but so it's a bit approximate. But basically, what we've got in this essay is the total number of words in this essay is about 1,000. It's very close to 1,200, okay? I think it's actually 1,190 or something like that. Let's call it 1,200. So the better responses in all of the modules, apart from Mod C, it's a little bit different, but I'm talking about your Merchant of Venice essay, The Hours and Daldry, The Hours and Mrs. Dalloway and T.S. Eliot. You're looking at 1,200 to 1,300 words per essay, okay? So that's something that you need to keep in mind. If you can't write very fast, that is going to limit you, and it's just a matter of really trying to practice getting your handwriting faster. This particular essay is 8 pages long, okay? The handwriting is, I'd say it's fairly average for handwriting. It's certainly not too big. Gets a little bit bigger as the student goes along. Oh, maybe not. Yeah, as the student kind of gets a bit tired and it might get a little bit messier, but 8 pages. Now, this introduction is 140 words long. Now, one of the things that I want you to pay attention to is the fact that in this introduction, there is no specific textual references. Now, this is something that I want you to think about for each of your essays across the modules. The fact that there are no specific textual references in the introduction means that the introduction is purely concept-based. So we're going to write concept-based. We're not writing very much on this essay at all. We're not kind of doing this annotation thing all the way through. I'm just going to be highlighting the different aspects as we go. So it'll be very rare that you have to write a note if you're following along. When you are writing your introduction, you're answering the question in a conceptual way. The examples that come from the text, that is what you put into your body paragraphs. That's how you are exploring the statements that you have made, how you're proving what you've said in your introduction is correct. There's no need to start talking about characters and events from any of the texts in your introduction. Now, obviously, sometimes, that it might be okay to mention something like that, but if you do so, very, very briefly, okay? Now, let's have a look at this introduction. So, to a significant extent, so there we've got that qualifier for to what extent. Textual conversations formulate a powerful transhistorical discourse whereby later texts emerge from the shadows to imbue new meaning whilst affirming the enduring power of the former text. So we've got the question, words of the question there, the question's being answered, and the idea of textual conversations is really clear. So the module here, textual conversations, but also saying that they formulate a powerful transhistorical discourse is and to imbue new meaning whilst affirming the enduring power of the former. Those are all words from the rubric, and so that's really important. The student is straight away saying, I'm answering this specific question and I'm showing you that I've studied this particular module and this is the rubric. Then we go into introducing the texts. This is evident in Stephen Daldry's postmodern film The Hours, which insightfully reimagines Virginia Woolf's modernist novel Mrs. Dalloway to explore ongoing preoccupations of existential concerns and time, which are original and disparate, I'm not sure which are viewed, I think it's meant to be, through original and disparate cinematic lens. So of note here is that we've got the context of Woolf and Daldry stated. So what I'm doing is, I don't know if you want to kind of follow along with the colour coding that I'm doing for the highlighting. When I've got this, so this kind of purpley colour, darker purple is for the textual conversation rubric mention. I'm going to use green for the context of Dalloway, and I'm going to use this kind of bronze colour for the context of, no, it's not Dalloway, yeah, Dalloway, for Daldry, for postmodern film. So we've got the form, film, context, form, novel, all right? And this idea of reimagining, that is a rubric word. So the student has stated here that their answer is going to be about the existential concerns in both, that's that search for meaning, and the notion of time. While Woolf illuminates the existential pursuit for purpose, Daldry reshapes this as in a postmodern context around the attempts to derive meaning through literature. Moreover, as Woolf explores the pervasive impacts of time upon an individual's present, Daldry's cinematic medium facilitates a powerful affirmation of ongoing trauma. Thus, later texts cannot be merely deemed as a shadow, as their presence imbue new contextual meanings whilst retaining intertextual connections and affirming of former ideas and values. And that might be affirmations, and affirmations of former idea and values. Now, notice that we've got no mention of characters or events. We are just seeing here what it is that the student is going to explore in terms of the concepts. So the concepts are that, like I said before, existential concerns and time. A little bit of extra information about exactly what they mean by that. So for Woolf, that pursuit for purpose, well, what is the purpose of life or of an individual? And then saying, well, Daldry reshapes that around the idea that we can divine meaning through literature. And the second idea, so this is where this student has got those 4 body paragraphs. So the first 2, where they go Woolf and Daldry, are about the notion of existential pursuit for meaning. The second 2 paragraphs are about the impact of time, and this is where the student talks about PTSD and trauma. So the impact of the past and this idea of ongoing trauma. So really clearly 2 different concepts, ideas that are going to be explored in the first 2 and the second 2 body paragraphs. The student has continued to reference the rubric terms throughout that. So original and disparate, we've got this idea of reshaping, and where was it? Affirmation, powerful affirmation. So imbue new meaning, that comes from the rubric as well. Intertextual connections, affirmations of former ideas and values. So all of these are rubric terms. So I want you to look at the introduction that you've got, and I want you to do the same. Take out any explanation of events or characters, stick to concepts, ensure that you have embedded rubric words throughout. All right, so first paragraph is all on Mrs. Dalloway. So what we're going to do, because I want you to get a visual of how much of the essay is spent on Dalloway and how much is spent on Daldry, so that you can kind of visually see that very similar balance. Now, having said that, the Daldry paragraphs are a tiny little bit longer because there is that bringing in of Virginia Woolf. Daldry's is the later text, so it's the one having the conversation. Virginia Woolf's text, Mrs. Dalloway, isn't having a conversation with the hours because it came first. It is the later text that is doing something, talking to, bringing in these new ideas around the earlier text. Now, I am also going to get you to, so I'm using pink for Dalloway, all of, I might just go a little bit smaller here. I'm going to go out a bit. Okay, that's a bit better. All of the next page is about Mrs. Dalloway. Now, can you see the depth that you have to go into to write so much all on one text and one idea? All right, so the amount of words that we have here, 225 words in this paragraph. So let's just put this here, 225. Now, what we're looking for is how the student has a conceptual evaluation about how Mrs. Dalloway as a text represents, or you know, how, I should have said, how Virginia Woolf uses her medium, which is the novel, to explore the concept of search for purpose. So we're going to be highlighting any time that there's reference to the context for Woolf, techniques and examples, okay? So I've got two different colours here now for Woolf's context, and that was my green, and a different colour for example and for technique. All right, so where are we? Let's go. Woolf elucidates the individual struggle to derive purpose and vitality in an uncertain modern age. So straight away, uncertain modern age. You don't need to go, people were really unsure about meaning in the modernist era because of the progression of blah blah blah. Uncertain modern age is all that you need. That references all of those ideas. By utilising stream of consciousness and focalising on neurotic war veteran Septimus Smith, who repeatedly confesses he could not fly, Woolf captures the paralysis central to a disillusioned post-World War I modern milieu. And here we've got the reference to context. You can make a list of these terms and use these terms yourself. The student doesn't own these terms. You can absolutely use them. Disillusioned, post-World War I, modern milieu. That gives all the contextual information that is necessary to explain what they're talking about here. Just back over on that first page, we have the first mention of a technique, which is stream of consciousness. So we're identifying the technique. Oops, sorry, I couldn't see that. I just need to do that. Okay, stream of consciousness. And we've got over on the next page, we've got example here as well. So we've got the, actually also the fact that we've got the war veteran, that's referring to context. And then as soon as we go to example, this mention of Septimus Smith, who repeatedly confesses he could not fly. Now, as soon as you see here repeatedly, that's repetition, okay? Now, instead of going through the use of repetition, this is embedding it in a conversational way, okay? Who repeatedly confesses he could not fly. Woolf captures the paralysis central to a disillusioned post-World War I milieu. His despondent rhetorical question technique, and see how the adjective adds to the evaluation of the rhetorical question. It's not just the rhetorical question, it's a despondent rhetorical question. The world the world has raised its whip. Where will it descend? Rejects life's idealistic beauty with the harsh connotations of the unyielding whip. Harsh connotations is a technique. Reconstructing life as immutable suffering. While the Freudian notion of Thanatos, that's the death drive. So this is referring to the modernist era, because Sigmund Freud was, was new on the scene and heavily influencing the era, especially, Virginia Woolf was quite fascinated by Freud and his writings. Is embodied by Septimus. Woolf contrasts him against the vitality of Clarissa Dalloway. So contrast is a technique. Contrasts him against the vitality of Clarissa Dalloway, who finds joy in lunching, dining, giving these incessant parties. And so here is our example. Yet when Clarissa reveals, in the middle of my party, here's death, Woolf's juxtaposition of, so we've got technique, juxtaposition of party symbolizing social connections against death, signifies how mortality intrinsically threatens an individual's sense of vitality. Yet Woolf suggests how a heightened awareness of mortality can enhance one's sense of vitality through Clarissa's interior monologue. Here we've got technique. But she must go back. She must assemble. She must find Sally and Peter. Got our example, our quote. Through the high modality, Woolf positions readers to recognise the necessity to define life through experiences and connections with others rather than an overshadowing fear of death. So one of the other things that we are going to be pointing out is the reference to readers and audience. So readers and audience, it's just that awareness of the reader on the other side of the page. So Woolf positions readers to recognise the necessity to define life through experiences and connections with others rather than an overshadowing fear of death. Thus, Woolf insightfully portrays the individual struggle to derive purpose, yet ultimately deserts the possibility of obtaining vitality in an uncertain modern milieu. And so there again, we've got that reference to context. Now, everyone's always asking, how many quotes do I need? How many techniques? And I hate answering that question because, there's so many different ways it can look. However, just so that you get a bit of an idea, in this one there are, and I may have miscounted, but so everything's a bit approximate, there are 9 techniques mentioned, and we have 5 separate examples. But you will have noticed they're not really, really lengthy, like lines and lines of example. Now we move on to the hours and Daldry. So let's identify how long this particular section is. Now, as I said, it's a little bit bigger than Woolf simply because Woolf is mentioned. So all the way down, then we turn over the page, and the entire page as you turn over is all of that is Daldry. And then a little bit more on the next page. So what we end up with is a total of 304 words. So we were 225 for Woolf, we're 304 here for words. Now, whilst we're here, we've got 11 techniques and 6 examples. So 9 techniques, 5 examples, 11 and 6. All right, now, so this is where we're talking about this as the later text. So straight away, the fact that the student has started with the word reimagine here, that is our rubric, okay? Daldry reimagines Woolf's exploration of the pursuit for meaning in his postmodern context, reshaping it around endeavours to derive vitality through literature, imbuing originality. Now, in the powerful transhistorical textual discourse. So, imbuing originality, powerful transhistorical textual discourse, these are all the word reshaping. Those are all rubric words. And for the context of Daldry, I'm just going to be using this brown colour, or this bronze colour rather. So he here references postmodern context as a start. Influenced by Lestard's postmodern potus rectus, I was going to actually look that up before and show it to you. I'll do that later. So this is kind of similar to the idea of Freud. There's this, this philosophical motion that I will get to at the end that influences Daldry. So it really is just a nod to context. Daldry employs a suicide motif throughout 3 different timelines to elucidate how individual lives are enmeshed within the legacy of life and death. So technique here, we've got motif, the suicide motif, and then the fact that 3 different timelines, that's technique as well. Daldry expands upon the character of Septimus Smith. So here we're referencing, so I'm just going to use the pink here that I've got for Dalloway, for Virginia Woolf, going, that recognition of Woolf's novel. Daldry expands upon the character of Septimus Smith as a visionary poet. Now, that is an example that is coming from Mrs. Dalloway, okay? Through the character of Richard Brown, who wanted to write about it all, everything that happened in a moment. And so this is an example from the film, Who We Were. However, Daldry establishes how Richard's supposed failure to encapsulate life's essence in his writing precipitates the latter's disillusioned choice of suicide. This existential despair is heightened by the jarring crescendo of the piano score as Richard plummets to the ground, with its subsequent use as a leitmotif throughout the 3 storylines, underlining our universal struggle to preserve vitality. Now, we've got Now, these techniques, jarring crescendo of the piano score, it's really important that you have techniques when you are analysing any of the texts, but in particular when you're looking at novel and film, you've got to have techniques mentioned for the film that are specific to the form of a film. So things that you're not going to get in the novel. So obviously music and camera angles and sound are all really important. So our example here is that Richard plummets to the ground, and then subsequent use as a leitmotif. Now, you might not know what a leitmotif is, but it is a really good one to use, and so you might want to write this down. I've got the definition here for you. So a leitmotif is a short recurring musical phrase or specific melody that's played associated with a specific character, place, idea or emotion. So you know that particular music that'll play repeatedly throughout a film when a certain character or emotion or whatever it is that's important, it becomes like, it's like a sound motif. Okay, that's a good one to use. This is contrasted. So contrasting is a technique, isn't it? This is contrasted against the repeated. So saying repeated rather than repetition. You know, Daldry uses repetition when he shows this is contrasted against the repeated cuts between Virginia Woolf and Laura Brown, which reveal the transhistorical power of literature to help people find meaning in life. So the example here is between Virginia Woolf and Laura Brown, and the transhistorical, that notion of something that's transhistorical, that is really speaking to the rubric. Okay, so even though this is like their concept, they're talking about the power of literature as being the purpose in life or being powerful, but yeah, transhistorical. Now we go into another example. Laura's subsequent surreal dream sequence of drowning alluding is a technique, to Woolf's 1941 suicide. And so here we've got mention of Woolf again. Now it's obviously not the text Mrs. Dalloway, it's Virginia Woolf herself, but it's creating that notion of a conversation where this metaphorical death of the author becomes a source of life for Laura, prompting her to live on with newfound purpose. Metaphorical technique. And I mean, this here, you know, evidence from a film can, you know, sometimes looks a little bit different because you might be referring to something a bit more holistically. It's not always a quote that someone says. Laura prompting her to live on with newfound purpose. Resultingly abdicating her family, Daldry reshapes Laura's choice into a form of empowerment by the soothing non-diegetic background music in the close-up shot. So we've got soothing non-diegetic background music. Always describe what it is the music is doing. Here it's soothing. Here we've got close-up shot where Laura tells Clarissa Vaughan, it was death of her domestic life. If it was death, I chose life. So talking about her domestic life there. This positions audiences to recognise how Laura's disconnection restores her vitality, generating original discourse, contrasting against Clarissa Dalloway, whose social connections strengthened her sense of vitality. So bringing in what did I say before about the audience? So positions audiences to recognise how Laura's disconnection, blah, 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 and we have mention here of Mrs. Dalloway, contrasting against Clarissa Dalloway, whose social connection strengthens her sense of vitality. and textual discourse. Rubric. So can you see we've got rubric, example, technique, bringing in Dalloway, positioning audiences to. Thus, Daldry imbues powerful originality within Woolf's exploration of the pursuit of meaning by extending the textual conversation to explore how literature can facilitate transhistorical meaning and vitality. So obviously we've got mention of Woolf there, bringing it in at the end of the paragraph to kind of tie that idea of a textual conversation together. And all of this is relating to our rubric, this idea of powerful originality and extending the textual conversation, transhistorical meaning, all of that. Okay, so then we move on to the students' discussion of Dalloway. So next paragraph goes to Dalloway. And the paragraph goes for most of the next page, you'll see just there. And it is 225 words again. So let's have a look. Starting with furthermore, so this is a good way to, if you're doing this kind of discussion where, especially with textual conversations, when you're going on to the next paragraph, if you say furthermore, you're showing that the essay is quite cohesive and it's this ongoing discussion that you're having, even though you're moving on to a different conceptual idea here. Furthermore, Woolf destabilizes temporal barriers to illuminate how the past continues to restrict one's present experience. So moving on to that idea of time. Now we have the mention here of a contextual idea, utilizing notions of Burgessorian time, and this is something that I got you guys to write about in the back or the front of your novels of Mrs. Dalloway. And you don't need to explain what that is. Mentioning it is your nod to context. Woolf employs shifting focalizations to examine the universality of time's impacts upon individual psyches. Shifting focalizations is a technique, and I quite like that term. It's a good one to use when you're referring to the fact that we go from one character to another and it just kind of shifts and shifts. To examine the universality of time's impacts upon individual psyche. By personifying St. Margaret's gilding into the recesses of the heat and burying itself. So that is our example. Woolf, I don't know whether this is Woolf, it looks like symbolizes and subverts together the layered, elusive and discontinuous experience of internal time. I think it's symbolizing. So there's our technique there. The layered, elusive and discontinuous experience of internal time. While Peter parallels, and this is a technique as well, although it's more of an example, let's just put it as both. While Peter parallels Clarissa to St. Mary's to criticise her embroilment, I think, in the past, Woolf's sorry, this is another one that I've got a definition for you. Woolf's circumlocutory, this is a word, circumlocutory lines denoting Clarissa refused time, the thought, he stood there thinking Clarissa refused me. Oh, sorry, not Clarissa refused time. Clarissa refused me, he thought. He stood there thinking Clarissa refused me. Ironically, divulges how Peter remains psychologically tormented by his former relationship. So look, all of this is our example. And we've got this technique of circumlocutory lines, and ironically, now what that technique is just here, and it's when you have an excessive amount of words used to express an idea rather than stating it simply. So beating around the bush, going around in circles, that kind of idea, and that we see happening in Virginia Woolf's novel a bit, especially when Peter is the focus. All right, so in shifting focalization to Lucrezia Smith, so here we've got this shifting focalization again as a technique, and here is our example, Lucrezia Smith, who repeatedly poses the rhetorical question. It says, so here, rhetorical question, why should I suffer? Woolf reflects Woolf reflects the perpetuation of cultural trauma in a post-World War I society. So that is our nod to context. Woolf reflects the perpetuation of cultural trauma in a post-World War I society characterized by disillusionment. Remember, you can steal these terms, okay? This inability to something in the past to escape. This inability to escape the past is embodied by Septimus Smith as time split, poured its riches over him. His lips fell like shells, like plains. So there's our example. Woolf's surreal visual imagery of bullet shells and fighter planes alongside Septimus's later hallucination of his dead comrade Evans accentuates how Septimus remains afflicted by former war trauma. So we have the examples here and the techniques. Now, you can't just use visual imagery as a technique on its own, but by saying surreal visual imagery and then explaining it, that is completely fine. Resultingly, Lucrezia's experience is implicated as her interior monologue. Example, to love makes one solitary, juxtaposes love and solitary to reveal her caretaker role for her shell-shocked husband, fosters her emotional isolation. Now, even though that doesn't sound like context, because it is very much about this particular character, the fact that isolation was such a big concern in the modernist era, that counts as context. Thereby Woolf articulately weaves a web of connections, revealing how the past how the past something impacts upon multiple individuals. The past I don't know what that is. But what we do have is articulately weaves a web. You know how there's that whole section where it's like a spider web and the idea of the web that breaks easily. So we've got kind of technique and example together there. All right, that was 10 different techniques mentioned with 9 examples. So now we go on to the last body paragraph, and it is Daldry. We've got, obviously it's going to be a bit longer because bringing in mention of Dalloway. So it goes all the next page and most of the page after that to give us a total paragraph of 254. Yeah, and you can see that the student has started to have to speed up and get a bit tired with their handwriting here. It becomes messier. All right, let's look. So we've got some rubric stuff happening and mentioning Woolf here. Additionally, Daldry affirms the power, so that comes from our rubric, doesn't it, the word affirm? Affirms the power of Woolf's exploration of time, cinematically giving it life as he reframes the discourse, so reframes the discourse around how past connections restrict present vitality. His cinematic transitions between the past and the present, that is technique there. Cinematic transitions between the past and present reflect the Jameson postmodern concept of the eternal present. So that is context, isn't it? Yes, it is. Of the eternal present, and that's postmodern, as he resonates with Woolf's subversion of linear time by utilising corresponding close-up shots. So, corresponding close-up shots of Virginia, Laura and Clarissa awakening to the diegetic. So here's our example. They are awakening to the diegetic chiming of alarm clocks. Is our technique. Daldry mirrors the connected experience enabled by Woolf. The word mirrors is in the rubric. The connected experience enabled by Woolf's shifting focalizations. So again, a nod here to a technique of what Woolf is doing. So connecting this style that we see in Mrs. Dalloway, where we've got the shifting focalizations, and here where we've got the corresponding close-up shots of the different contextual characters, it's mirroring that technique. Daldry affirms and so again, mirror, affirm. It is all rubric. Daldry mirrors the connected experience enabled by Woolf's shaping. Daldry affirms the restrictive, impact of the past. It is, as he establishes how the appearance of an old friend, Lewis, induces Vaughan's mental breakdown in her kitchen. So we have got an example here. The high angle shot, so technique, accompanied by the gradual zoom to her crying face. So this is all example. Symbolically captures, so technique, the past's harrowing psychological impact. Her recollection of Richard giving her the literary epithet Mrs. Dalloway. So this is, that's the wrong one. This is example. And her subsequent confession from then on, I've been stuck with the name, example, conveys her psychological entrapment. This aligns her with Clarissa Dalloway. So rubric, and back to Mrs. Dalloway. Stifled ruminating of not even being Clarissa anymore. And so this gives us another example from Mrs. Dalloway. Okay, an extra one for good measure. Because of matrimonial restrictions to her identity. Furthermore, Daldry's cinematic transition from Richard in his apartment back to him as a child. So we're back to another example here. Calling out for his mother captures pervasive impacts of time on one's psyche, resonating with Woolf. So resonating is rubric, mentioning Woolf. Consequently, accosting responders with the visual images of the monochromatic pills. So when he's got the blue pills there, so that's what they're referring to with the monochromatic pills. So these are that's an example, alongside the diegetic siren sounds. So we've got visual images of and diegetic siren sounds, which represent Richard's afflicted psyche. Daldry positions responders to, and here we've got the audience awareness, positions responders to recognize how childhood abandonment shapes his present misery. Thus, Daldry insightfully reimagines, we've got rubric again there, Woolf's exploration of time, restrictive impacts upon an individual's present, perpetuating a powerful textual discourse. Rubric. We had in there approximately, I could be wrong, but I think it was 9 techniques and 6 examples. And we get to our conclusion. Thereby, Daldry's film is not merely a shadow of Woolf's novel, as it is through his cinematic medium, which captures the enduring power of notions of existential. Oh no, sorry. I've just said that was the end of the. It's not the end of Daldry, sorry. It is. This is. Hold on. Thereby, Daldry's film is not merely a shadow of. No, it is. Don't worry. That was a double up. It is the conclusion. I'm not confused. Thereby, Daldry's film is not merely a shadow of Woolf's novel, as it is through his cinematic medium, which captures the enduring power of notions of existential meaning and time into a postmodern context, reshaping the textual discourse with insightful originality. And so a very, very short conclusion, which is what I recommend, going back to the rubric terms. Okay, so when you have a look at this, you can see that throughout there is this mention of the rubric terms, and that's kind of embedded. So the entire essay is embedded in a discussion of the rubric terms, using both texts in a way that is not, this is seen in the example of, it's all like a discussion. And we end up with lots of examples and lots of techniques. I mean, if you think about how many we've got, there are, for Woolf, we've got 5 examples plus 9, so we've got 14, and there was an extra one there, so 15 examples from Woolf. we've got 6 and 6, 12. I did have it written down. I think I've added that up wrong, but lots of different, I had written it down somewhere, I don't know where, but lots of different, oh, here it is. Okay, I knew I wrote it down somewhere. Okay, so we've got the total Woolf paragraphs at 450 words, Daldry at 558 because of that inclusion of the other text. We've got a total of 14 examples from Woolf, 12 from Daldry, 19 techniques from Woolf, 18 from Daldry. So very similar, okay? This is something that you can pause on and write down because you can use these. So these are the techniques that were mentioned for Woolf. These are techniques mentioned for Daldry, and where they were done more than once, I've kind of indicated that as a bit of a count there, like that. So think about embedding some of these techniques into your essay if you need to increase what you are doing. Now, as I go through and read people's drafts, I'm going to be referring to this video, like rather than me writing it all out again on every single person's essay. So that's something that hopefully will be a little bit more useful as you go to improve your drafts. Have fun with it.